Thank you very much, Sandra. Thanks to the iilp, to the Claro Group. Thank you, Sidley, for hosting. I love these symposia. I've had the opportunity to travel around the country with Sandra over the last couple of years, making this presentation to some groups more open to it than others. Happy to be in Los Angeles and not in Southern Texas, where I got some eye rolls from the crowd during my presentation at a diversity and inclusion conference. We've seen a bunch of numbers. These numbers haven't changed much in the couple of years that I've been giving this presentation. I do want to offer some updates. They're not great updates, but they're updates nonetheless. We really don't have great numbers, and this is a recurring theme, right, across a number of demographics, but we don't have great data, right? We're not collecting it. We're not asking lawyers or law students to self-identify across the spectrum of interactions where we might be able to collect this data and actually put it to good use for analysis. We know that as of 2016, there are 2,431, it's a very exact number, self-identifying LGBT lawyers in private practice. Right? That's an increase of about 6% over 2015. As a percentage increase, that's pretty good, right? I mean, that looks better than just about all of the rest of the statistics we've been looking at today. It's only a measure of private practice, though, right? It's the only place that we're collecting the data. In 2016, I thought this was so interesting, approximately 4.8% of summer associates self-identified as LGBT, but only 2.4% of lawyers in private practice are LGBT. Where did they go? What happened after that summer associate experience? I have some ideas. It was probably not particularly friendly for many of them. LGBT lawyers, no surprise, about 58% of those who self-identify as LGBT are found in the 4 major legal markets: New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Those choosing to go to private firms are more likely to join firms with 250 plus lawyers. And when you get to the 500 and 700 cutoff points for law firm size, those numbers rise. For all of the most obvious reasons, right? You've got mature diversity and inclusion programs, you have affinity groups that have been funded and have some recognition, you have law firms like Sidley that have actually made a public concerted effort to actually address and to programatize around diversity and inclusion that includes LGBT diversity. So that's where we are in private practice. We have no idea where we are in the academy, where we are in the in-house corporate law ranks. We don't know where we are in terms of government service or in nonprofit service. There are reasons, right, why people may decide that they do or do not want to self-identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered. So let's break it down. Let's talk about employment protection, because ultimately this is what we're talking about. What are the risks, right, of being out and on the job? Today, and this is a modest increase from 2014 when we reported in the original article, now 20 states plus the District of Columbia have non-discrimination in employment law, which covers both sexual orientation and gender identity. 2 states have non-discrimination in employment provisions for sexual orientation, but not for gender identity. 28%, or 28 states in the United States have no protections in employment for sexual orientation or gender identity. So the majority. And 50% of lawyers practicing in this country are practicing in jurisdictions where they are not safe to be out at work. 3 states expressly forbid municipal governments or any state agencies from offering protections on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. I think we can imagine where they are. I will call them by their name. We have Arkansas, we have Tennessee, and we have North Carolina. So even if you are a progressive political body in a large city in one of these less progressive states, your hands are tied by state legislatures who remain very hostile. So we wonder, well, geez, certainly there must be some sort of federal protection, right? There's got to be some overlay that protects people from this kind of base discrimination, and the answer is there is not, right? There is no federal non-discrimination in employment protection on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. That is there is nothing at the federal level that mandates that private employers protect their LGBT and transgendered employees. Now, the Obama administration famously expanded the scope of the EEOC's jurisdiction over employment discrimination matters, imploring them, right, to include gender identity and LGBT status. In 2012, the EEOC ruled that gender identity and sexual orientation were covered by Title VII. In 2015, they ruled again that LGBT employees must be protected from this kind of discrimination. In March of this year, the 11th Circuit ruled that Title VII does not protect LGBT employees from discrimination. And in April, a month later, the 7th Circuit ruled that it does. So we've now been set up for a showdown in the Supreme Court. Those briefs have been filed in the Evans case. We expect the Supreme Court will take the case. They have to now. We've got a split in jurisdictions and a rather important matter. In July of this year, the Trump DOJ reversed prior administration's executive orders, also arguing that Title VII does not protect LGBT employees. And we had a very unusual situation with the EEOC arguing on one hand in their briefs to the Supreme Court that it does, and the Department of Justice arguing on the other hand that it does not. It will be very fun and very interesting to see where this goes. More fun for those of us on the sideline, less so for the litigants, but it will be a case very, very soon. So what about private employer protections, right? So we can't rely on the state, that's fine, right? So we look towards our organizations or the organizations that we aspire to be a part of to protect us. 92% of the Fortune 500 have non-discrimination policies on the basis of sexual orientation. That's compared to only 4% in 1996. We've made huge leaps and bounds, right? And we've seen tectonic shifts in public sensibilities around sexual orientation and gender identity. 82% of Fortune 500 companies include gender identity in their non-discrimination policies compared to just 3% in 2002. And again, is a massive shift, right? 600 plus corporate organizations have received perfect scores in the 2018 HRC Equality Index. It is a record number. Law firms really stand out, right? If there is a shining spot in the HRC's index, it is private law practice. Law firms boast the most perfect scores of any other industry group in the HRC. Now, I think it's magnificent. I also sort of look sideways at these numbers, right? Because we know that stated policy and practice don't always match. Private sector employers have led the charge to combat state and local legislative efforts to roll back protections, and they have been the most vocal pushback in states like North Carolina, in states like Arkansas, in states like Tennessee, where there are large corporate concerns struggling to make their workforces the most dynamic, competitive workforces on the planet, which means, of course, making sure that they are truly representative of their clients, of their customers, and of the businesses that they do business with. I just alluded to the disconnect, right, between the great numbers, right, and the reality. And Gretchen's not here, and I will say that, you know, Walmart has gotten in trouble this year, right? They've had their 100% ranking suspended by the HRC because of some uncomfortable and unpleasant litigation around transgender employee treatment. Corporate non-discrimination policies suggest an inclusive culture. Steve Blake and I, my co-author in the paper that was published in the 2014 journal, wrote about the gay Bradley effect. The Bradley effect will be more relevant and maybe more memorable to those of you sitting in Los Angeles when we had Mayor Bradley in a gubernatorial race against Duke Majian, and throughout polling until the day of election, Bradley, who was an African-American Los Angeles mayor, was polling well ahead of Duke Majian. It was very clear and obvious to everybody who was getting ready to vote that he was going to win this handily, and he lost the election. The idea was that people, when asked, who are you voting for, gave the answer that they thought they were supposed to give, or the one that they thought was the most politically expedient in the moment. But when they walked into the booth and pulled the lever, they pulled it for the white guy. What leads employers to overstate their commitment to LGBT equality? Peer pressure, right, in the form of industry groups, business competition. They know that their peers within the industry have promulgated policies that are much more inclusive than their own, and so they're trying to compete. They need to recruit to gain a recruiting advantage based on perceived commitment to inclusivity, and the public scrutiny that comes from the HRC, or rather the self-promotional marketing opportunity that those scores present, will induce policy writing that may not actually play out in reality. And think of it this way: you've got a large corporation with a large employee base and a very inclusive employment policy. But when you look at the executive suite, it doesn't look particularly diverse or inclusive. And behind closed doors, sentiments are expressed that, you know, I'm okay with having LGBT employees here, but I definitely don't want them sitting in the C-suite. I wouldn't want my general counsel to be gay, right? Or I wouldn't want my CFO to be a gay Latina. They don't look like me. I don't know how to golf with that person. They don't belong to my tennis club, etc. It isn't an overstatement to suggest that this is actually problematic, because obviously people who are gay and practicing law are not self-identifying as such. What can LGBT lawyers do to assess prospective employers' commitment to fairness and inclusion? I would say massive amounts of due diligence that go well beyond looking at the corporate website. That is only the beginning. You want, first of all, to know that your employer is publicly stating, or prospective employer is publicly stating, that they are committed to diversity and inclusion that includes you, an LGBT person. But you've got to look under the data. You've got to look to not only its policies, but how it resources around those policies. Are there LGBT affinity groups inside the organization that are resources to gay and lesbian employees who will need a social support system once they onboard? And if they do, can you have access to that affinity group to ask questions? How many of the people that you are interviewing with would self-identify? How many of the leadership in an organization would self-identify as LGBT? And if you're looking outside of the corporate realm and you're looking at law firms, you can dig more carefully into the numbers with them. How many of the partners in the law firm self-identify as LGBT? And if you can't get a straight answer, pardon the pun, from the people that you're interviewing with, you need to circumvent the process to find out. How many of those LGBT partners are running the firm or part of a management team? And what is the organization's reputation for advancing LGBT attorneys? Outside of the actual experience of interviewing, you've got to be able to find some resources, and they exist everywhere. Speak with LGBT attorneys, talk to people in the bar. Internet research on the decision makers is really key. Look at their LinkedIn profiles, look at their Facebook profiles. Where do they hang out? Who are they associated with? Reach out to organizations and their affinity groups and ask hard, pointed questions. People have asked, and we talked about this a little bit in the paper, what are typical career paths for LGBT lawyers? Well, they're the same, right? They're the same career paths of all diverse lawyers and all lawyers generally, although we do know statistically that LGBT attorneys, more than any other diversity group, tend to public interest jobs. Large law firms, large corporate legal departments, government agencies are the most likely places LGBT people are going to find a home. Non-traditional paths include roles in philanthropy leadership, regulatory compliance, entrepreneurship, social work. It's endless. Limited only by the imagination, and I would add geography. There are a number of resources available to LGBT lawyers. There are national LGBT professional networks, and this is, I know a tongue twister. I've said LGBT about 100,000 times now, so forgive it. They're out in professional networks, out in equal workplace advocates, out in law. There are a growing number of professional associations for gay and lesbian lawyers. Local bar associations, the LGBT Bar Association of Greater New York, Bailiff in the Bay Area, the National LGBT Bar Association, Lesbian and Gay Lawyers Association of LA, and the Stonewall Bar Association of Georgia come to mind as just examples. I want a caveat. Remarkable that there are so many organizations and no data gathering. It's a quandary. Final thoughts. As a recruiter, the decision to be out in the workplace is a deeply personal one. Discrimination is real and it's persistent. It's regional, perhaps. It is certainly generational, but it is real and it remains problematic for LGBT lawyers everywhere in the country and around the world. Lawyers who self-identify as gay and lesbian face the same challenges all lawyers face in charting a career path. Where are we most likely to find others like us? How do we find employment where we're safe to be ourselves without the distraction that comes with being different from everyone else? What value comes from being authentic to our colleagues and to our clients? How many people identify as LGBT is less important than how those lawyers are welcomed and integrated into the profession once they actually make a choice to join your firm. The largest legal markets remain the most attractive. Progressive political environments drive that. Large LGBT communities in large cities drive that. Strong municipal protections in employment where they're available. Professional networks and access to mentors are key, and you're going to find those in major metros. Remember, due diligence is key. It is such a profound honor to talk about this. As a gay man and as a recruiter who's worked with lawyers for now well over a decade, I have witnessed firsthand the anxiety and the angst that comes in an interview setting where a partner in a large nationally known law firm would wring his hands in 2015 over whether or not, as he was considering making a move to another firm, he should out himself to the partners that would be voting on whether or not he could join the partnership in San Francisco. I found it shocking, I found it sort of quaint, and I found it disheartening. It is a persistent problem, as I said. It is not going away, and our visibility is key in driving the conversation forward. Thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon.